Now, we got some follow-through questions. Definitely, I'd say in your top 10 favorites to deal with. This is on our church website. You might be a little familiar with it. But the question is regarding the illusion, the deception of the eye rather than the occultic sacrifices and so forth. He wants to know, is this the same thing the magicians of Pharaoh did during the time of the Exodus, so in reference to Exodus chapter 8? And could it be the same kind of magic the Antichrist could use? So with two passages in mind, I'll read them. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all signs, powers, and lying wonders. That the wonders aren't necessarily wonders per se, they're messages. They're meant to deceive. That even in regards to giving life to the image of the beast, Revelation 13 is very explicit. It was given to him authority to give life to the image of the beast. That the fallout of the sixth bowl judgment and the drying up of the Euphrates River, the serious fallout of that plague, isn't just that, oh no, how will Iraq and Iran get one of their three main water sources? It's the demons going and performing signs to every nation to gather them against Christ at Armageddon. So the point being made is this. When people like the honest magicians say, I'm lying to you, I'm tricking you, I'm making sure I can manipulate your field of vision to do these tricks based off of my ability to know what you can and can't see, and the practice I've dedicated my life to. When the Egyptian magicians performed, say, for example, the miracles, verified miracles that Moses performed. Say, for example, with the initial, okay, I'm going to turn this stick into a snake. I'm going to make the Nile turn to blood. I'm going to make there more frogs than you know what to do with, and on it goes. You draw special attention to verse, let me make sure I can read this properly, verse 18 and 19 of Exodus chapter 8, where they stop trying to imitate the miracles after the lice, and that's significant. But can you address this, how you would usually handle it, and I'll deal with the Antichrist? Well, I guess I already did, but
Sure.
the Exodus one.
Yeah. As far as the general answer, my personal view is that these, like Thessalonians 2:19, lying signs and wonders, counterfeit miracles in the NIV. I think counterfeit's a really helpful term in understanding what those wonders are. Authority doesn't necessarily mean supernatural, it just means permission, because God's in control. So you have permission to do this. It could be a nuke, it could be chemical warfare, or it could be supernatural. But the wonders, the signs, just means it's a symbol. Doesn't necessarily mean it's supernatural, but the wonders or miracles, now that is something that breaks the laws of physics. That's something that would be considered supernatural. And Paul is careful to point out that it's a counterfeit. It's not the real thing. It's a copy. So when it comes, so that's my general opinion, is that the things that will happen in the last days, especially with the Antichrist and giving life to the image and so on, would be either some form of deception, technology, or something like along those lines. And I don't know that it would be super. I wouldn't.
From the Antichrist, not saying the plagues are all naturalistic,
Yeah,
but
if
the
it's an act of
Antichrist
God,
message.
that's entirely different. The fire from heaven during the Exodus is definitely, when Elijah calls fire from heaven, it wasn't some natural phenomena. That was like a miraculous sign from God.
And,
but the Antichrist's demonstrations of authority and sign giving and quote unquote power. Power, again, could mean authoritative power, not necessarily supernatural power. And I think what happens is, and if I may just go on a tangent for a moment, one of the mistakes that skeptics make is just presuming that everything has a natural explanation. Even believers sometimes will look at things and say, well, God could have had the volcano go off, and that could have caused this, and then
avoided the Goshen entirely.
The river would have separated that way. So they try to just explain everything away that God does as some kind of natural phenomena. And I think the same mistake can be made on the other side with Satan, just presuming that if you see words like authority or signs or wonders, that it automatically means supernatural, miraculous, wave your hand in the air, a demonic miracle takes place. And the reason I tend to gravitate away from those things is because throughout Scripture, God always sets himself apart through the miraculous. That's the first thing. The prophets of Baal, right? I mean, they were even being mocked by the prophet of God, and they could not call fire from the sky. And going down, through Scripture, you start to see things like Psalm 72:18. It says, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who alone works wonders." He alone, Isaiah says, knows the end from the beginning. So that means a palm reader can't tell my future. Only God knows my future. Only God exists outside of time. Every other creature, including the heavenly ones, are temporal. They live in time, even if they are incorporeal, meaning without physical bodies. If they're spirits, that doesn't mean that they are timeless and eternal in the sense that they've always been and always will be. They had a beginning point. They were created. So that being said, when it comes to the Exodus, that's kind of an interesting one because it does give the illusion, or it does give the impression, not the illusion, the impression that these pharaohs, these magicians of Pharaoh's court, were able to duplicate the miracles that God did. So when you go through the text, you first find an interesting word that's used. Like, for example, the three miracles, the first three that they do is the cane to snake, the frogs, the Nile. Those first three, it says each time Aaron would speak on Moses' behalf, and then it says, then the Pharaoh's magicians, the magicians of Egypt, did the same. And then it gives a qualifier, with their secret arts. And so that word secret arts is really the same kind of concept of what a magician does when he covertly hides or secretly hides a method of performing something. And the reason we know that these secret arts aren't some sort of demonic enchantment to gain or garner demonic power in order to duplicate the miracles that Moses and Aaron were performing in the same sense through satanic power, but just a little weaker because Satan's just not quite as strong as God is, I think is a wrong look at the text. Here's why. First, you see Moses taking a dead stick and having it turn into a living, breathing creature, a snake. The Bible says that everything that's been created has been created through Christ, and nothing that has come into being apart from him. Which kind of tells you that only God has the power to create life. It seems to be a good indication of that. When it says the Pharaohs did the same, we can't assume that they actually did using the same technique, meaning a miracle from God. It just says they did the same using their secret arts. It just so happens that we've done that in our show, where we took a stick and turned it into a living, breathing snake and showed that an illusionist can absolutely, even as a long time ago as 1500s BC, and create the illusion of taking a stick and turning it and making it look like it turns into a snake.
But never work with animals. They're very finicky.
We would use an Arizona black racer. And yes, it bites, but it's not poisonous. And when it bites, it hurts. My friend got blood all over him. But my mentor, who wanted to do it, we crafted, the three of us, how to do it. Actually, my mentor and I, we did it. And then I would come out, I'd hold out the stick, and then I'd hand it to him. And then when he would turn it around, it would be a snake. It was really clever. We've had people run out of the room. We only did it a couple times because it was a little too controversial, especially when we were doing our presentations in churches. People started thinking this is satanic because this is right out of the Bible. So we just stopped. Plus, it was kind of hard getting bit by a snake right before you go out, before every show. Because he didn't like being put in the compartment that was necessary to be put in to create the illusion of him becoming a living snake out of a stick. But anyhow,
but the point being made is that you can do what they were doing.
We were doing
they
it
weren't
with them,
doing what Moses was doing.
Right. They weren't doing what Moses was saying. Here's a clear sign why. First, there's the snake and the frogs and the blood. And you have to ask yourself, the text says there were frogs everywhere. Well, if there's frogs everywhere, and it says the pharaohs of Egypt did the same thing, well, they didn't do exactly the same thing. The text is clear.
Double everywhere. They just made frogs appear.
Yeah, they just needed to make a frog appear. They didn't need to make or just a table of frogs.
Where are you going to find frogs?
They could, exactly. They could not have made frogs appear everywhere because there already was frogs everywhere. So they had either a table or a basket, and they made some frogs appear. That is like sleight of hand 101. In fact, my award-winning act that I took to Las Vegas and have toured all over the country with was making 9 doves, a parakeet, and an Amazon jungle blue and gold macaw appear from my bare hands. And the macaw would appear from my bare hands out of a ball of fire that would make you like have to flinch. It was so bright. So that was the act that I won the internationals with in Vegas, standing on stage wearing my little tuxedo and just making birds appear and letting them go and flying to my little perch. You can watch clips of it on my YouTube channel. If I can do that with no modern technology whatsoever, if I had the knowledge, I could have done it 3,000 years ago. It requires no technology, just a working knowledge of sleight of hand. Easy, easy, easy. So they had to do that. And then the same is true with the Nile. Just as a side note, it says that all the rivers, all the water was turned to blood. And that gives us an indication that they had to go and dig for fresh water.
Well, it says in the text.
Yeah. And then I always ask the question, where did they get the water from if all the water was turned to blood? So they didn't do the same thing. They didn't turn Niles and rivers to blood. They had a bowl of water. And I think The Prince of Egypt, the animated film.
The DreamWorks one, yeah.
The DreamWorks animated film probably best depicts the scene accurately.
Yeah,
they had a
doing
bowl
all
of water. They sneak in some red powder. Because remember, this is why Pharaoh hardened his heart. He probably even knew, well, that's not quite as impressive, but it's enough for me to just say no. You know what? That bowl just turned red? No. He knew. He had to have known there was something off. But here was the clear indication that they were employing natural means, not supernatural means. When it came to the gnats or the lice, something very difficult to contain. I don't know I could figure out how to make lice appear on Sean's head other than taking him to a daycare center and playing with lots of little kids. Maybe he might get lice that way. I don't know.
I got the hair for it, that's for sure. But noting that point, you could train a macaw, you could train even doves,
Yeah.
but can you train lice?
I don't think I could, even containing lice in a way to make it appear on people. So we might, with modern technology, be able to come up with a way to do that. But back then, there was no technology available to make lice appear on a person.
And
remember, there was already
specifically-
lice everywhere, so they couldn't make lice appear on everything. They had to just make lice appear on one person's head. So that means they'd have to clean the lice off somebody and then create and supernaturally do it, but they couldn't. And here's what's really interesting is they go to Pharaoh. This would have clearly risked their lives, and says they tried with their secret arts. That means they racked their heads together and go, how can we pull this off? Like I'm doing right now as I'm thinking about it. And they says they could not with their secret arts. And it says they go to Pharaoh and they say, this is the finger of God. It took these level of miracles and then the lice to convince them, okay, this is genuinely supernatural. This is beyond anything that we can conjure up with our natural ability.
This is Daniel 2 level shenanigans going on here.
And you never hear from them ever again.
And what's also key is noting what do lice go after. I made a comment about my fuzzy bear status, but the emphasis and point is Egyptians were really dainty about these sort of things. We have historians that mention that there were slaves they'd cover in honey just specifically to attract flies away from Pharaoh. The guys would shave their heads, the girls would have wigs and little mascara and stuff. They'd pluck their eyebrows, not for today's reasons. They were dreadfully afraid of lice. And when this plague came, they only went on the Egyptians. Meanwhile, the Jews, they're slaves. They're not going to pedicures and, grooming stations and shaving and stuff. They got more hair than they know what to do with, yet the lice are not only, and this is why I said trained, going after the Egyptians who don't have any body hair, and they make great efforts to make sure of that, but not going after the Hebrews who are hair buffets. So noting God is not only creating these lice from nothing, or dust in this case, but noting the point, when they go, they're behaving not like normal lice.
Right.
So,
and if you think about it logically, if Satan was supernaturally empowering the magicians of Egypt, the magicians of Pharaoh, and he can give them the power to take a dead stick and turn it into a living, breathing organism called a snake,
which we can verify wasn't likely the case.
Certainly Satan could turn some dust into some lice. I mean, when you think about stick to snake, dust to lice, It's really not all that different. It's not like, God took a boulder and turned it into an elephant, and Satan went, "Oh, that's a little big for me. I can only do things as small as snakes and lice." He didn't. Because that's not what was taking place in the text, and that's the view that I take. I tend to lean towards only God does miracles, and anything else would be some sort of elaborate deception, unless God specifically intervenes in such a way so as to augment the deception, because the people, as in the last days, it's a very possibility, are so hard-hearted that God's actually aiding in the deception because it's already there and they're begging for it. The idea that God sends a powerful delusion. It's possible, but I just think it's unlikely. But it's possible that God could employ a supernatural intervention to help the deception, help the world have what it wants, and that is their false gods and their false miracles.
Which, again, we don't even necessarily have to leave this text. A good example of God intervening in judgment would be the unnatural hardness of Pharaoh's heart, because he's seen miracle after miracle. He is basically playing the third grader over and over again and saying, "Oh no, consequences go away. I'm still in charge." The point being made is that, though, when we're talking about these things, obviously you don't discount the ideas of possession, but you don't also at the same time attribute every single mental disorder as demon possession. You would recognize there are instances where the enemy is permitted use of power, but you don't say that everything that's attributed to the demonic is. In this case, and noting in the text itself, there is ample evidence, which you've provided, of these being literal magicians in the same way that you are, with one exception. They didn't tell Pharaoh they were lying to him. And that's the difference. Your message is the gospel. Their message is Egyptian paganism. And guess which died out?
If people have tried to make that comparison and say, well, even if the magicians of Egypt were employing trickery, you're still lying and deceiving people. And I would say, no, it's the very opposite. We're enlightening people. I've helped set people free, not just towards the gospel, but away from the occult, away from their cultural superstitions. I don't know how many students I've had come up to me in my multiple tours in South Africa who is steeped in witchcraft and beliefs in the occult and spiritualism and worshiping ancestral spirits and mediums and channelers. It's so a part of the culture that it's likened to the Western trust in the doctor with the doctor lab coat. If a scientist or a doctor says, "Thus saith the medical field," we kind of just say that's the truth. That's kind of the Western mindset. Well, these witch doctors in South Africa, it's the same thing. If the Sangoma say, it is. If they say, they always go there before they would go to an actual medical professional for healing any kind of ailment. I've visited these guys. I've tested them out to see what kind of things they were doing, and it was the same kind of parlor trick that you'd see any psychic, medium, sleight of hand artist perform. But the cultural hold on the minds of young people, the level of fear is so unbelievable that it just breaks your heart. So I for many years was cautioned from ever going and doing my program the way I do it in places like South Africa, because they said they will believe it's real. I go, no, they won't. Trust me. And so I would, debate with leadership with Campus Crusade saying, this is the best place for me to go. Trust me. So finally we did it. And the national director at the time for the college ministry of South Africa said, we need this on every campus in the country. And so I would do my disclaimers. I would talk about the witch doctors. I wouldn't say Sangoma because I didn't want to get killed. But I would say many people claim and this and that, and I would perform effects that were like what they would do in one of their presentations. And I'd have students running out the doors, literally thinking witchcraft is happening. And I would have staff, Campus Crusade staff, waiting.
Little catchers.
Catch them and say, he's going to explain it. I would not only explain that it's a trick, but in many circumstances, I had to teach the inner workings of deception, to say this is how simple can create such a dramatic effect. You were running out the door, but yet you could go in your classroom with craft paper, scissors, and chalk and make what I just did in 5 minutes and perform it without really any skill. That's how clever and simple the deception is. But you believe it because of the way I presented it to you. And so I'd have students come to me crying, saying, I've been afraid, I don't sleep, I'm always afraid of getting a curse. I have to go to the witch doctor to get the curse removed because I got a bad grade, I didn't make first cut on the football team or whatever issues going on in their life. They constantly believe it's some sort of ancestral curse or some spiritual entity or a demon. And I had to explain to them that these guys are lying to you and that they have no power over you and that the only power they have is your ability to have fear for them. But as long as you know the truth will set you free. And boy, talk about free indeed. It was profound seeing a high school kid who's like all muscle crying, going, I've been like in traumatic fear my entire life. And for the first time, I think I can go to sleep tonight without being afraid of the dark. And that's the whole culture is that way. So yeah, it's a really important tool that we use to help people see how easy it is to be deceived, but we're not actually tricking people.
Yeah, so note, demonic is deception with the intent of leading you away from God. Your art form is deception with the intent to entertain and inform, even as a leading into the gospel.
Well, I wouldn't even say it's deception because deception seems to indicate the idea that we're actually misleading somewhere when there's not even deception involved because we're explaining what we're doing. So we're creating an artistic effect, creating an image of reality at the same time disclaiming that it's just an illusory effect. Just like the way I say it in the show, sometimes I'll say, haven't you seen superhero movies? Isn't it amazing those things that they can do? How do they do that? Oh, it's not real, Oh, I didn't know it was fake. How do they do that? And they go, special effects. And I go, oh, wow, that's what I do as a magician, except I do my special effects live on stage. Superman can't really fly. Iron Man can't do those things. It's a special effect. I'm just using special effects, but on a stage. And all of a sudden the light bulbs go off and they go, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the emphasis and point is when you're talking to people about these issues, that's what they need to take away. Yeah. And likewise in the message, people would say, oh, so you just tack Jesus onto it and that makes it all right? Well, no, we need to first recognize sources and overall purpose. Yeah. But it would be an art form just like, for example, the Spirit of God being upon the people in Exodus who were used to sew together and to do metal work for the articles of the temple. The Spirit of God was equipping them for those things. Just like when I'm trying to engage people, model the heart of Christ just by being generous and giving people sculptures and so forth, I'm doing that with the intention of not only starting better conversations, but also just to be an example of a decent person that they encountered that day.
I don't know. Seems like you're just creating idols.
Yeah, those little statues and carved images and stuff.
But the point we always try to emphasize from talking to Christians is that when Satan, the power of Satan, one of the things I like to say and remind people is that Satan's power is not in the effect, but in the lie. It's the message surrounding the deception that leads people astray. So even if the effect appears to be real, listen to the message. The message is what leads people astray. If the message points people away from God and to the occult or the idols, or to the person themselves, they just want to gain a following for themselves, the Sai Babas of the world, then that's evil. And we're pointing people to Christ. We're not lying or deceiving anybody. We're using a platform of entertainment to create a special effect, to draw attention, to illustrate a very valuable point, and that is it's very easy for human beings to be deceived. The world has been blinded by the evil one. His power lies in his ability to lie and his cleverness, and not in his being incorporeal and a spirit being. Only God can genuinely has authority to break the laws of physics. And so that's
introduce new factors for the intent of verifying a message, and that's the whole point. Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, whether that's in words like we're answering questions now, or in deeds, whether it's in magic or in sculpting. So
just think, years ago, people didn't think that God could ever use a drummer or someone who played an electric guitar, and now we see it all the time.